Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Thursday, April 29th, 2021. Time for another show. We've had another non-State of the Union address. I'm very proud of everyone in the media covering the thing properly, at least right up at the top. I mean, maybe their coverage of the actual event didn't necessarily reflect what actually happened or anything like that. But hey, who cares? As long as they are not saying it was a State of the Union address or taking care to point out why it wasn't considered a State of the Union address. It's quite interesting to see. And to tell you the truth, I can't guarantee you 100% that they didn't always do it this way. But it always sort of felt like that wasn't the case. But this time even social media seems to have a handle on it. And it's not terribly important for any reason that I can actually think of. Although, you know, it's always... I like it when people start to get things right and speak with some precision. And so congratulations to everyone I saw doing that and not to everyone I didn't see doing it. I don't know. I actually didn't see anybody making that error in the least. So congratulations to everyone for getting everything exactly right. Now, the contents of the speech, that's something entirely different. And I can't help you with it. I mean, honestly, you know I don't watch them typically. As it usually goes. But last night I was also busy in addition to the fact that I don't usually watch the speeches. And I was a little bit disappointed because I did kind of want to see what it looked like in the chamber. Plus, of course, the historic view, although I figured everyone would provide me a photographic record of the fact that there are two women sitting behind the President of the United States when he delivers not the State of the Union. That has never yet happened, but even a joint, an address to a joint session with, of course, Kamala Harris being our President of the Senate and Nancy Pelosi, our Speaker of the House. Very interesting. Good to see. That's nice. Didn't change the nature of the event for Republicans, of course. Now, I understand. I guess what I was really interested in was what did it look and feel like? And you really kind of have to watch the speech live to do that, although I can go back and watch clips. And I did see a few clips where there were applause lines, which is another issue, actually, by the way, in this morning's reflections on the speech, which I didn't see. Other people's reflections, of course. But there was a very, I think, noticeable difference in when there were applause lines. It wasn't terrible. That, there was like only the smattering of golf applause or something like that in an empty chamber. But it was noticeably different. And I really thought that I would see more superficial coverage of that. And I am pleased to report that so far I guess what's happening really is my Twitter feed is shielding me from that nonsense. Although I do see the traditional amount of, I don't understand. He gave a fine speech, if not, as some people said, an excellent speech, an ambitious and amazing speech. You know, there's always some difference of opinion there. Plus, of course, Republicans telling everybody it was terrible, and communism as well. Hitler socialism, as I told you, honestly, I like to say around the house. But I was struck by the fact that I haven't seen as much reporting like that as I thought I would, and Axios and the like instead saying, I haven't seen the headlines, but I see people complaining already saying, oh, typical of Playbook or, Axios and Politico, etc., describing the coverage as, for most batters, hitting a home run is a good thing, but here's why it's a problem for Biden. And I don't remember which Twitter wag it was who put that one out, but I think that's a direct quote from it, so maybe I can, in fact, find it. But, I'll take a look around and see who gets credit for that one. And, but for the most part, it sounded like things went relatively well with the The key difference being, as I saw, I think, well, let's see. I'm going to go back into my own feed here and see if I can find all the things that I saw and thought were interesting and set aside for discussion. Joshua Holland, that's right, saying this morning, it wasn't that long ago when everyone would applaud Anodyne America boosterism, and then one side would sit down for the partisan stuff. And that is usually the case. Now, he says, they sit on their hands while Biden says he wants to cut child poverty. And this is literally the case. I saw only a clip or two, although what was circulating a lot last night was clips of and references to Lauren Boebert. Lauren Boebert apparently managed to get herself inside the chamber for the event, and lots of commentary on that last night, although it was, as I said, self-selecting, because I, after my meetings were over, logged on to take a look at what was being circulated in social media about the speech, and Lauren Boebert was at the time trending, so I clicked on it. So I got a full serving of Laura Boebert complaints, not only her own complaints, but other people's complaints about her. People saying things like, she's basically sitting there with this stunned look on her face, as though she didn't or couldn't understand why she wasn't allowed to bring her gun into the chamber for the speech. But apparently she, an exemplar of Republican response to the speech, by which I don't mean the official Republican response, which was given by Senator Tim Scott. And, got the regular reception. Not much expected from those things usually anyway. So, but Lauren Boebert apparently, sitting on her hands and glowering at lines in the speech like, we can do a better job in America of taking care of people, or we should try and create a bunch of jobs, or make sure people are healthy, and do certain, educate our children, et cetera, as opposed to, how much of college debt should be forgiven, which I expected to be maybe a more partisan approach, or I don't know. But at any rate, stuff that would ordinarily just get polite applause from Republicans was met with silence. And I wonder whether, some of that is a function, of course, of electing people like Lauren Boebert, who have no idea, what to do in a situation like this, or what's expected of them, or how to govern, even when the questions are finally put to them in Congress. But I think also possibly did have something to do with the atmosphere. Without the full contingent of fellow Republicans present in the chamber who do know that you're supposed to politely applaud when, Anodyne America boosterism, as Josh put it, is displayed. There were no visual cues for her. She just figured that Republicans go to a Democratic president's address and don't applaud anything, no matter what, because a Democrat has said it, and Democrats applaud everything because Democrats have said it, and that's the way it normally goes in her mind, I'm sure. And she may or may not have ever watched a speech. She may have a leg up on me in terms of watching past speeches. She may have watched Trump speeches. I don't know. But there's a larger contingent than usual of Republicans who literally don't have any idea what, polite society calls for in any situation, much less a address to a joint session of Congress. So, I didn't find in my initial search there what I was looking for with regard to the comment about Biden and hitting a home run, etc. Let's see. Let's see if I can take a look around under different search terms. But I don't know. Anyway, someone gets credit for making fun of the Beltway press. There it is. For most batters, hitting a home run is a good thing, but for Biden, it's going to cause problems. Let's see. It comes from Upstate Downstate. The Twitter handle is using numeral 8 for completing those two phrases. UPST 8, upstate. You see, upstate, downstate. New York area tweeter, responding here to Joan Walsh's complaint on the same topic. Never change, she says. Never change, playbook DC. That's who we're talking about here. This morning's basic message, Biden did great. Here's why that could be a bad thing for him. Okay, that's the Politico playbook morning line, at least according to Joan Walsh. All right, so let me save those two things for you so that you can view them for yourself and make your own call about what that's all about. All right. I think other than that, we are once again, I believe, without Greg, thanks to computer difficulties that take some time to resolve themselves, and they may resolve themselves with like a brand new computer, and depending on how that's delivered to the house or how it's retrieved, it could be more or less time. We'll see whether everything is in place perhaps for Monday. At any rate, yeah, there's a million other stories that I had set aside, and it might be a good day to do a deep dive into Pocket and figure out what we've been missing all this time, and some of the suggestions that a few of you have made, and a new bulletin crossing my desk. I guess I should check again this morning. No, I think I'd be up to date if I said that we thank today Michael Mayholtz. Have I got the pronunciation of your last name correct? I don't know. I hope so. But Michael Mayholtz boosting his Patreon pledge, and I guess I want to thank you, and B, I want to note for the record that I hope this doesn't become tiresome, because I do notice that every time we take the time out to thank people specifically, I mean, makes sense, right? You like kind of having somebody say, hey, I acknowledge your contribution. Thank you very much. You keep our show alive. We appreciate that. And then you say so, and then other people say, I believe I would like to help keep that show alive. Or perhaps I would like to have someone read my name on the radio show. I don't know what motivates it. Either way, it makes a good deal of sense to me to spend some time thanking everybody. So I think we're now up to date. I had said yesterday I need to make a ledger of everyone's names, and probably I should keep it as a spreadsheet so that it's easily accessible and searchable as well. But, well, you know how those sorts of projects usually go. But I'll give it a shot. I think I want to do that. I owe you that much. Thanks again to Michael and everybody else who's joined in. And as I said, the other issue with it is every time I say thanks to people, other people say, I'd like to join in. So now's the time. The door is open, and we could, if you find some comedy in it and you just think it's funny to make me do these things over and over again, then by all means, let that be what drives you to contribute to support of the show. All right, I'll take it, and gladly so. Let me take a look back in Pocket to see what else I had put aside in terms of response to the address. Paul Krugman getting a lot of attention, as usual, on Twitter, though, for his response to the response. And people enjoying that, and I guess it demonstrates the same old pattern, so again, means we haven't missed much. Interesting, that's not where he chose to give the speech. This is just must be a stock photo that is illustrating the New York Times piece on it. And this is a photo of Tim Scott, mask on and all, at the bottom of the stairs and escalators, I guess in the basement of I'm guessing in the basement of the Senate side of the Capitol, where they would run down to catch the little subway cars that run back to the Senate office buildings. But a popular stakeout spot for Republican senators and occasionally Democratic senators to give comments during breaks in the various, because there were two of them, impeachment trials of Donald Trump. And I was like, oh, if he gave this, I mean, I don't know why he would give the speech there, but that would be awfully symbolic. But no, I've seen clips of the speech, and he gave it in some standard backdrop place with a nice podium and lots of flags and blue backgrounds and everything. So this is just a stock photo. That really would have been something. What a message to send. had that been the case. Anyway, Paul Krugman commenting, the GOP response to Biden's speech decried, quote, the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Presumably, Krugman says, a reference to the 1993 Clinton tax hike, I guess, after which we, added 23 million jobs. I think his point here is that, once again, the response from Republicans is a standard one. Now, it doesn't matter what's proposed. If it's proposed by a Democrat, you say it's the biggest tax hike in American history or world history or a generation, and it's going to be a job killer, and et cetera, et cetera. We've spent enough time on the show reading through that 60 years of Republican rhetoric document to know that that's the case. But it's interesting to see it illustrated again. And alongside it is the New York Times transcript of the rebuttal speech. Again, for whatever reason, illustrated with this stock photo of Tim Scott as opposed to a photo of him actually delivering the speech. But maybe they published it ahead of time. No, the publication time is this morning at 12:12 a.m. So the photos are available. I don't know. We'll talk. Well, I'll call the New York Times and ask them why they did this. But Krugman goes on to say, Obama also substantially increased taxes in 2013, after which we, by the way, gained 10 million more jobs. And, of course, this is our economist, Krugman, giving us the actual results of the things that Republicans habitually complain about being job killers, right? He's going to kill all the jobs. Clinton raises taxes. We added 23 million. Obama raises taxes. It's going to kill all the jobs. Gained 10 million jobs. For what it's worth, he continues, this may represent genuine ignorance. Many GOP figures seem unaware that anything good happened between Reagan and Trump. After all, who that they listen to would tell them otherwise, I guess. But it just adds to the sense that Republicans have no idea about or interest in policy. And this is interesting because it sounds a lot like what we've been saying in the last couple of days. It's all mumbles about big government job-killing socialist, then on to woke cancel culture coming for your hamburger. I mean, that pretty much sums it up. As we put it the other day, grumbling about Dr. Seuss, Potato Head, Jade Helm, something. On the other hand, fair taxation, health care, education, COVID relief, job creation. Pick one. Which party do you think ought to be in charge of governing? The one with just a new micro scandal every second that all turn out to be false, and then nobody deletes their tweets about it or anything like that. I did see Aaron Rupar questioning this morning how it is that Tom Cotton's Twitter feed still has his bitter accusation about Kamala Harris forcing the government to buy her children's book for migrants at the border, which obviously we've learned since, I think we knew at the time was not true, but we've since learned is not only not true, but the reporter who wrote it has left her job. So you tell me what's going on. Anyway, I think they're just habitual liars and they don't care. All right, let's see. There's I did put aside for our consumption today, if nothing else, I figured I would put aside a link to last night's Daily Kos open thread that Laura Clausen put up. President Biden addresses joint session of Congress. Again, that applause line for me. That the Daily Kos doesn't have State of the Union or any reference to it in the headline. Everyone there knows perfectly well by this point exactly what kind of speech it was. And, if you missed the speech like I did, you could update yourself. I guess we could just sit here and run through the updates to the open thread. But I imagine more of you saw the speech than I might otherwise guess. And so recapping it probably doesn't make a great deal of sense for you. But there were some interesting catches with respect to, small aspects of the speech or reactions to the speech. For instance, Hunter noting at just before 9 o'clock last night, if you're waiting for Republican reactions, Senator Marsha Blackburn has you covered. She posted her own response to Biden's not yet happened speech over an hour ago. And then noting, whoops, that tweet was now deleted. But members of Congress get advance copies. Well, lots of people, the press, non-press, get advance copies of the speech. And generally speaking, for a president that's, normal, the draft of the speech is pretty much how the speech ends up being delivered. Donald Trump was the only one who threw surprises in. And, on the whole, it's a good thing to me if a president speaks a little bit extemporaneously and goes off script just a little. But for Trump, it was always a weird, kind of uncomfortable, disastrous, perhaps, moment. Because, rare. It's very rare. In fact, I would say most presidents never say anything like, well, what's in this speech is something that I personally disagree with and want to depart from and correct the record on. And that was something that was weird about Trump's relationship with his speechwriters. But also, his departures from the script tended to be, I can't read this word, or I have already attempted it and I've mispronounced this word, and I now declare by the power vested in me as President of the United States that this is the new pronunciation of that word, or I've been informed by reliable authority that this word can also be pronounced the way I just mangled it. You all remember how he made use of his extemporaneous speaking time. Anyway, not too much else to really, I don't think, derive from all of this. So perhaps instead we can investigate some of the other things parked here that, have a little additional insight. We'll take the Washington Post's Aaron Blake on the subject. 4 takeaways from Biden's first address to Congress. Again, correctly put, nicely done. Here's the picture we've all been waiting for with Kamala Harris and Nancy Pelosi behind him. Aaron Blake puts it this way. Let's see, what 4 takeaways will we be allowed by the Beltway sages today? 1, all of you, a repeated fanciful nod to bipartisanship. Listening to parts of Biden's speech, you wouldn't necessarily know Congress is stuck in gridlock. Although if you were listening to Biden's speech, you probably have been paying attention to other things and might have noticed this, but Aaron's conception of it is that you might not have somehow. While no Republicans supported Biden's coronavirus stimulus and the party is balking at the size of his infrastructure package, among many other proposals, Biden spoke almost as if Congress had put up a united front. It's an interesting observation and not entirely wrong in that it's almost as if Congress has put up a united front, because a lot of time spent either responding to the address last night or in the few weeks leading up to it from Republicans when they speak to their local papers are about their successes in securing funding for local projects of importance, funding for which came from the COVID relief package that they voted against. We've already pointed out how that's been happening, and more examples come in every day. And I guess also centered around an exchange last night with a Republican member of Congress, I guess, as the president was making his way in or out. I'm not certain which. And now I can't recall exactly which member of Congress it was, but I'll figure it out perhaps during the break upcoming. But it involved apparently an exchange, well, not an exchange, but a handing off of a business card to the president, which he politely took and put away. But I can't remember who it is, but it's the new member for Staten Island, right? So one or two of you may remember off the top of your head exactly who it was, but I'll find the example of it. Anyway, this repeated fanciful nod to bipartisanship gets some more treatment from Aaron here. Biden said that with the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, we did act together. We passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. Of course, he's actually really referring to Democrats, independents, and Republicans who supported the package out among the general public. inside the building, of course, no Republicans supported it. And all the independents in the building are essentially caucusing with Democrats. So it was an interesting illusion. But I guess harkens back to the days when Barack Obama, who would know full well that it was Republicans obstructing his agenda, would say Congress was failing to act. Little frustrating. Anyway, he added of the coronavirus vaccine response, senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January. Down 80% because of all of you. As a body, I guess that was true. And, of course, all the people listening. And we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those first 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling with your help, everyone's help. We're marshaling every federal resource. It was an interesting rhetorical tactic. Beyond an appeal to Republicans to support various gun restrictions, Biden didn't dwell much on his opposition. And even when making that appeal, Biden seemed to almost apologize for his tone. Ad-libbing from his prepared remarks. Look, I don't want to become confrontational. Neither of Biden's references to all of you appeared in his prepared remarks either. So there's always a flourish or two that a president will add to one of these speeches, and now we know which one it was. And that's the reason they give them these advance copies. They can make a mini story out of what is in there and what's not, and what appeared on paper and what came through in the delivery. Aspects of the coronavirus response have sometimes been more bipartisan, but that hasn't been the case during Biden's presidency. Biden almost seemed to be pretending it were, perhaps reaching out to Republicans. We'll see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We can finish the sentence I had to cut off, unfortunately, due to the break. It's pretty simple. Right, so aspects of the coronavirus response have sometimes been more bipartisan, but that hasn't been the case during Biden's presidency. Biden almost seemed to be pretending it were, perhaps reaching out to Republicans, ready, by suggesting he would be more than happy to give them credit if they just played a little ball. So, a little activity in the background today. Next up, break's over. So, all right. Well, anyway, a conspicuous China focus. I did see a lot of mention of that during the evening last night. This week, that's as we're reading the work of Aaron Blake here. This week, I wrote about how Biden's early agenda is geared toward capitalizing on the partisan barriers that President Donald Trump bulldozed. Trump made Republicans more non-interventionist, more in favor of infrastructure spending, even though he didn't do any, and less doctrinaire on many issues. It's a weird way of putting it. The unifying principle of the GOP often seemed to be Trump rather than any specific ideology. I think you might have been watching a different country, Aaron, but okay. I mean, it's true that he made it Trump rather than any specific ideology, but, and that's only because Trump doesn't have any coherent idea of what his ideology is, but the idea of them being less doctrinaire seems wrong, like completely. Anyway, again, on Wednesday, there were traces of Biden trying to build upon or recast Trumpism for his benefit. That was particularly the case on China, which he brought up repeatedly. At one point, he said there was simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. Biden, at two different points, recounted conversations with Chinese President Xi Jinping, pitching China as a formidable foe that must be dealt with, albeit in ways different from Trump's approach, which is, of course, to treat him to the most beautiful chocolate cake you've ever seen, which, dubious by way of, diplomatic value, but also probably not the most beautiful chocolate cake he's ever seen. Anyway, he's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world, Biden said of Xi. He and other autocrats think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies. It takes too long to get consensus to win that competition for the future. In my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. Quite honestly, I would never highlight that for any analysis whatsoever, but okay. Biden added another point, can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. To oversimplify things a bit, you really want to get tough on and keep the upper hand on China? Forget trade wars. Pass my bill. I don't feel like I got a real sense of what the hell was going on with that. Next up, of course, you got to throw this in because it's a newspaper and yada yada, both sides. Section 3 here, number 3 out of the 4 takeaways. Hey, big spender. I guess that's the only line that came to mind when he was talking about spending. For much of the 2020 presidential campaign, Republicans tried to paint Biden as a radical liberal, or at least an enabler of radical liberals. That's what they do with all presidential candidates. It's too simplistic to say Wednesday's speech revealed that caricature to be true. Biden used it to propose massive spending, but generally focused more on bread and butter issues that have high levels of bipartisan support than the liberal true believer ideas that conservatives have turned into boogeymen, by which you now have to count among them taking away all your hamburgers or something like that. But the speech did demonstrate a president who seems less and less concerned about risking that kind of reputation. While Congress is still considering Biden's $2.3 trillion infrastructure and jobs bill, Biden detailed a new $1.8 trillion American Families Plan that would include significant expansions of government spending on education and the social safety net, combined with the $1.9 trillion coronavirus stimulus plan that already passed in Congress. That brings Biden's proposed spending near $6 trillion. It seems to be, or rather it remains to be seen, how much the still percolating ideas will be paid for, or rather how the ideas will be paid for, rather than financed through deficit spending, if that's an actual concern that you have or haven't been convinced that it no longer matters, but okay. Biden is calling for tax increases on the wealthy and corporations, for example, along with funding the IRS for more aggressive audits of tax returns. An idea being that you could return to actually auditing people who it might actually benefit the country if they did get caught and were forced to pay their taxes. We haven't much discussed the IRS proposal of the last couple of days. And, of course, he claims that this could bring in hundreds of billions of dollars. And it could if rich people actually paid. He's pitching these ideas as spurring huge growth rather than simply giveaways. But what's clear is that he's proposing a huge expansion of government, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. And that sounded almost Trumpy in the way it was said, and I bet it wasn't well received. For weeks, stories have described a president who is not content to play it safe in the office he long sought. He has to be especially emboldened by the strongly positive public reviews of the coronavirus stimulus and his early infrastructure proposal, despite the price tags. Why despite the price tags? How about because of the price tags? But even as Americans seem more comfortable with government spending these days, again, with Biden owing some credit to Trump, not really, there's always a limit. I guess he's trying to say, that Biden owes some credit to Trump because Trump threw the Republican rule book out and spent money hand over fist, even though Republicans traditionally were against big spending programs. But he was actually stealing a good deal of that money, so I don't know if it really counts. Also, no rule book was established in its place, so that's not helpful. And it's also not really a departure from the way Republicans do business. They campaign on we have to reduce spending, and then they get in office and they spend as much, if not more, than Democrats when they get into office, and then when they lose again, just go back to the same playbook. So no, I don't think he even owes any real credit to Trump for that one. The proposals also represent a challenge for Republicans. The math isn't really in Biden's favor, given the 50-50 Senate and the required 60-vote majority for most things. Oh, boy. A cynic might suggest he's putting forward popular ideas that probably won't pass and challenging Republicans to kill them. But either way, Wednesday's speech threw down the gauntlet for the next 3 years of legislative battles, and a big storyline in the coming days, weeks, and months will be just how much spending people are prepared to stomach beyond the trillions used to combat a public health emergency. And I guess we'll see. And, well, putting it this way won't help a great deal, but I guess Aaron's not interested in that. And fourthly, setting the terms of a tax debate. Biden devoted a significant chunk of his speech to defending his proposed tax increases, saying over and over again in several different ways that they wouldn't touch anyone but the very wealthy. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not propose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000, Biden said. And we're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And when you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them whose taxes you want to raise instead. Well, how about no one's? But anyway, and of the 39.6% capital gains rate he's proposing for top earners, that's where it was when George W. Bush was president, and that's true. The repeated emphasis on this point was calculated. It's a speech. It's written ahead of time, Aaron. Of course it's calculated. Biden knows he'll be called a tax raiser. He wanted to make sure he's talking early and often about exactly who will pay those taxes, a promise he'll now have to live up to, oh my, and challenging Republicans to address that specifically, given polls showing Americans strongly favor those specific types of tax increases. I guess it'll probably go pretty well. Gee whiz. I don't know. I guess I figured it would be worth at random taking a sample of reaction to the speech from the Washington Post, given that it's one of our national type papers of record, but that was pretty useless, quite honestly. I think Aaron Blake did everyone no favors with that piece. How interesting. Okay. Well, there are other places to search for interesting and fun stories. We probably should spend a little bit of time, at least, on the fact that the FBI spent a little bit of time searching Rudy Giuliani's home, his apartment in New York, and I guess a couple other folks on the list and on the hook for their Ukraine shenanigans. Remember the first impeachment of Donald Trump? Yeah, you probably recall all of that. Apparently, that was the motivation for a lot of that activity yesterday. New York Times has it this way. FBI searches Giuliani's home and office, seizing phones and computers. Prosecutors obtained the search warrants as part of an investigation into whether Rudy Giuliani broke lobbying laws when he was Trump's personal lawyer. Let's see. Look at all the names on this one. Oh, boy. It's like a greatest hits parade of the Trump era, at least at the end here. I see Ken Vogel and Maggie Haberman getting fourth and third billing respectively. I'm reading backwards the byline here. But also William Rashbaum and Ben Protess are in places 1 and 2 on the byline. Federal investigators on Wednesday seized cell phones and computers from Rudolph W. Giuliani. I don't know if you know who that is. The former mayor of New York City, they helpfully inform us, who became President Donald J. Trump's personal lawyer, stepping up a criminal investigation into Mr. Giuliani's dealings in Ukraine. 3 people with knowledge of the investigation said FBI agents executed search warrants around 6 a.m. at Mr. Giuliani's apartment on Madison Avenue in his Park Avenue office in Manhattan, carting away the electronic devices, Mr. Giuliani confirmed in a statement. Now, after a year plus since the actual impeachment and the activities, even longer since the activities that they're likely investigating here, why a 6 a.m. search warrant? That's just the FBI's favored tactic. And it may have as much to do with the fact that they wanted to get in and out with as little traffic as possible as anything else. But they love knocking on your door early in the morning. Very often, it is said they like to serve those warrants quickly and as early as possible so that the targets don't have any opportunity to get tipped off and destroy or otherwise disappear evidence. But Giuliani has had every opportunity to do so for quite some time. So it'd be very surprising, and it'll be very revealing when and if they actually turn any evidence up and we hear about it from this search, because honestly, anything that still exists between the time he undertook these activities and now is just a testament to his, his sense of entitlement to a secret pardon. I'm not certain what he thinks is waiting in the wings to save him if he left all that evidence behind. Or he just has no idea how to, efficiently rid himself of evidence, which would also be amazing at this point. The execution of search warrants is an extraordinary action for prosecutors to take against a lawyer, let alone a lawyer for a former president. The move marked a major development in the long-running investigation into Giuliani, which examines some of the same people and conduct that were at the center of Trump's first impeachment trial. It was a remarkable moment also in Giuliani's long arc as a public figure. As mayor, Giuliani won national recognition for steering New York through the dark days after the September 11th attacks, and earlier in his career, he led the same U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan that is investigating him now, earning a reputation as a hard-charging prosecutor who took on organized crime and corrupt politicians. And I guess that's still true. He took on organized crime as a partner now, and as well as corrupt politicians. So he's still very much involved in that world and taking them on not as adversaries, but now as business partners. In recent years, however, his image has been sullied by his effort to help Trump dig up dirt in Ukraine on President Biden's son and to lead Trump's attempts in court to overturn the results of the 2020 election with baseless claims of widespread fraud. In his statement, Giuliani denied any wrongdoing and argued the search warrants demonstrated a corrupt double standard on the part of the Justice Department, which he said had ignored blatant crimes by Democrats, including Hillary Clinton and other vampires, and President Biden. Giuliani's lawyer, Robert J. Costello, called the searches unnecessary because his client has already destroyed all the evidence. Or rather, he says because his client had twice offered to answer prosecutors' questions, except those regarding Giuliani's privileged communications with the former president. What they did today was legal thuggery, which, thuggery is illegal. But okay, that's what Costello had to say about this. The investigative actions on Wednesday were expansive, with agents also serving a grand jury subpoena on Giuliani's executive assistant. 2 people with knowledge of the matter said. Is that Christian Allen, or is that some other executive assistant? I'm just curious to know. Brian Monroe, by the way, curious to know whether FBI investigators found anything, quote, inflatable in Rudy Giuliani's home. No word on that so far, but I would not be terribly surprised. But I would laugh very hard if that were later revealed to be the case. One of the warrants for Mr. Giuliani's devices, Brian, right? Maybe. Indicated that the federal investigators were searching for communications between him and several Ukrainian officials, including the former president, Petro Poroshenko, and 2 former prosecutors who had helped Mr. Giuliani collect information about the Bidens in Ukraine, one of the people said. FBI agents also executed a search warrant on Wednesday morning at the Washington area home of Victoria Tensing, a lawyer close to Giuliani, who had dealings with several Ukrainians involved in the hunt for information on the Bidens, according to people with knowledge of that warrant. The warrant was for her cell phone. No mention of Joe DeGeneva, her husband and law partner. That is interesting all by itself, which might mean that they just don't live together, which, okay, I guess that's a possibility. Ms. Tensing, a former Justice Department official, has also represented Dmitry Firtash, a Ukrainian oligarch under indictment in the United States, whose help Mr. Giuliani sought. And I assume the article, it's maybe not. I don't see it in my quick skim of the next couple paragraphs. No mention of the fact that she also was, in the course of representing Firtash and in the course of Giuliani's quote-unquote work on behalf of who knows who, his relationship with Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman. No mention of those guys. Interesting. The federal authorities have largely focused on whether Giuliani illegally lobbied the Trump administration in 2019 on behalf of Ukrainian officials and oligarchs who were helping Giuliani's dirt-digging campaign. At the time, Biden was a leading contender for the Democratic presidential nomination. You may understand that he did go on to win that nomination, and then the presidency itself. The United States Attorney's Office in Manhattan said the FBI had sought for months to secure Justice Department approval to request search warrants for Giuliani's phones and electronic devices. Under Trump, senior political appointees in the Justice Department repeatedly sought to block those warrants, the New York Times reported, slowing the investigation as it was gaining momentum last year. After Merrick Garland was confirmed as Biden's Attorney General, the Justice Department lifted its objections. While the warrants are not an explicit accusation of wrongdoing against Giuliani, their execution shows that the investigation has entered an aggressive new phase. To obtain a search warrant, investigators must persuade a judge that they have sufficient reason to believe that a crime was committed and that the search would turn up evidence of that crime. Press officers for the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office declined to comment. The investigation of Giuliani grew out of the case against two, here they are, Soviet-born men who aided his mission in Ukraine to unearth damaging information about Mr. Biden and his son Hunter, who was on the board of an energy company there. Prosecutors charged the men, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, and two others with unrelated crimes in 2019, we think unrelated anyway, and a trial is scheduled for October. Prosecutors have examined, among other things, Giuliani's potential business dealings in Ukraine and his role in pushing the Trump administration to oust the American ambassador to the country, the subject of testimony at Trump's first impeachment trial. As he was pressuring Ukrainian officials to investigate the Bidens, Giuliani became fixated on removing the ambassador, Marie Yovanovitch, whom he saw as an obstacle to his efforts. At the urging of Giuliani and other Republicans, Trump ultimately ousted Ms. Yovanovitch. Prosecutors have explored whether Giuliani was working not only for Trump at the time, but also for Ukrainian officials or businesses who wanted the ambassador to be dismissed for their own reasons. According to people briefed on the matter, it is a federal crime to try to influence or lobby the United States government at the request or direction of a foreign official without disclosing it to the Justice Department. At least one of the search warrants for Giuliani's devices explicitly stated that the possible crimes under investigation included violations of that law, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, according to one person with knowledge of the matter. Prosecutors have scrutinized Giuliani's dealings with Yuri Lutsenko, one of the officials who helped Giuliani and his associates in their efforts to tar Mr. Biden, while also urging them to work to get the ambassador removed. Among other things, prosecutors have examined discussions that Giuliani had about taking on hundreds of thousands of dollars in apparently unrelated consulting business from Mr. Lutsenko, which resulted in a draft retainer agreement that was never executed. Giuliani has said he turned down the deal, which would have involved helping the Ukrainian government recover money it believed had been stolen and stashed overseas. Ms. Tensing met with Mr. Lutsenko, and she had planned to travel to Kiev in May of 2019 along with Giuliani. In the end, Giuliani canceled the trip amid criticism that he was meddling in the affairs of a foreign country. A spokesman for her law firm said Ms. Tensing was informed that she is not a target of the investigation, adding, she has always conducted herself and her law practice according to the highest legal and ethical standards. Sure. As the investigation into Giuliani heated up last summer, prosecutors and FBI agents in Manhattan were preparing to seek search warrants for Giuliani's records related to his efforts to remove the ambassador, but they first had to notify Justice Department officials in Washington, according to people with knowledge of the matter. Federal prosecutors must consult Justice Department officials in Washington about search warrants involving lawyers because of the concerns that they might obtain confidential communications with clients. The proposed warrants for Giuliani were particularly sensitive because Trump was his most prominent client. Career Justice Department officials in Washington largely supported the search warrants, but senior officials raised concerns that they would be issued too close to the election. People with knowledge of the matter said, under long-standing practice, the Justice Department generally tries to avoid taking aggressive investigative actions within 60 days of an election if those actions could affect the outcome of the vote. The prosecutors in Manhattan tried again after the election, but political appointees in Mr. Trump's Justice Department sought once more to block the warrants, people with knowledge of the matter said. At the time, Trump was still contesting the election results in several states, a legal effort that Giuliani led, those officials noted. Wednesday was not the first time that a personal lawyer for Mr. Trump was the subject of several search warrants. In 2018, the FBI searched the offices of Trump's previous personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, who later pleaded guilty to campaign finance and financial crimes. Trump called that raid a disgraceful situation and an attack on our country in a true sense, by which he meant, of course, a false sense, because now he says it was a great thing, and Michael Cohen is a turncoat, and the truly pro-American thing to do would be to raid his house all the time. How interesting that view would change. All right, so now we have the basic groundwork of what went into it and the basic facts of Trump administration Justice Department officials doing all they could to block these warrants from being executed both before and after the election. I don't know what accounts for the delay between the inauguration, Biden's inauguration, and now, but of course there was some delay in getting Merrick Garland installed as Attorney General, and I guess they didn't want it to be the case that the minute he arrives, he approves search warrants against Rudy Giuliani. So some decent interval of time was supposed to pass before those things were executed. And I guess that's it now. We're finished with that. Hooray. I'm glad to see that that's the case. All right, let's see. Other issues of interest. It looks like a bit of a long read. Perhaps we can save that for the other side. And now, in the few minutes we have before the top of the hour break, I will note for the record something that I think we have failed to put on the record up until now. But that's mostly because I figured that you all remembered, because we've said it 100 times, that this was the case, and you aren't worried. And no one complained in the interim, hey, when are you going to address this very scary threat being renewed by Republicans to play games and to conduct brinkmanship with respect to the federal debt ceiling? And the answer is, well, you all remember that the federal debt ceiling, one, is something ridiculous that, as a matter of policy, many progressives have suggested doing away with entirely. But you almost certainly remember through all of our discussions of reconciliation, though it was never relevant to the reconciliation bills under consideration at the time, I always took time out to note that there were several approved areas under the rules and under the Budget Act that reconciliation could deal with, and some that it could not. Most of the time has been spent talking about what it could not deal with. But I always love to sneak in the mention of the fact that the debt ceiling could be raised via reconciliation, that you can issue those instructions and do that. And I guess that's the upshot. And that's why I guess it never really rose to panic levels. I put away this Washington Post article about it from, almost 10 days ago. Senate Republicans take step to revive debt ceiling brawls with the White House. It refers here in the subheader to a non-binding vote being a sharp pivot from their hands-off approach during the Trump administration. And I guess they're talking about a internal Republican conference decision, that being the vote, to return to debt ceiling brinkmanship that they abandoned after one of their own took over the presidency. Basic hypocrisy, very often on display by the Republicans. But the reason it hasn't come up for discussion on the show was I figured you all remembered that that's not as serious a threat anymore. And it's particularly a lot less serious of a threat now that we have a parliamentarian's ruling under our belt, even though people are still a little bit confused about exactly what it means, but which clears the way for even more reconciliation bills than people previously thought, for whatever reason, was possible either during a single calendar year or a single fiscal year. Now we know that that limitation is out of the way, and that a revised budget resolution would be allowed to include reconciliation instructions. They can simply include reconciliation instructions that do whatever it is they wanted to do with the debt ceiling and pass it with a bare majority. Whether or not Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema would be along for the ride is another question, but at least you know. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So I got it. I mean, we're basically done. There's a longer article involved in this, and I'm sorry to Tony Romm, R-O-M-M, not Tony Romo, but Tony Romm, R-O-M-M, for not being particularly interested in sorting all the way through this article, because I think it's largely irrelevant. Although I do note for the record that there was no official response that I am aware of from Senate Democrats simply saying, well, that's just no longer the threat it used to be, because we know very well that you can include reconciliation instructions for raising the debt ceiling, and we're about to try a second reconciliation bill, or at least about to threaten it anyway, so not really much of an issue. However, it did sort of disappear from the headlines pretty quickly, given that it is, after all, brinkmanship on the debt ceiling, which is ordinarily a fairly serious threat. Why? I don't know. Everybody loves to ignore the fact that you're allowed to raise the debt ceiling by reconciliation. But this was, all right, whatever. Anyway, it was out there, and within the first couple of hours of seeing the story break, I said as much, and then there just wasn't much outrage about what Republicans were doing, and not much concern being expressed, and I wonder whether everybody just sort of realized that was the case. But just wanted to put that on the record. We've saved the Republic again. Congratulations, everybody, for knowing the facts about reconciliation. I kept mentioning that fact, and nobody would make it relevant. And then when it was relevant, nobody would just say it out loud. I'm very upset about that. But I don't know, for whatever reason, everyone just wants to keep that buried as a fact. But if it wasn't for my harping on the apparently not very relevant fact, we would be, I guess, mired in panicked stories about debt ceiling brinkmanship again, and we're just not. So I guess we'll just keep on doing the same thing and talking about what appear at any given moment to be irrelevant details of how things actually work, so that when it comes up, we can just calmly dismiss this sort of nonsense out of hand, and do so confidently. So I thought that was good news. All right. Well, here's another interesting bit of I guess a little bit longer read, maybe not. I don't know. Let's get this pop-up out of the way. Not terribly over long, but I thought an interesting addition to the mix here from the Daily Beast, Kelly Weil, I'm not sure how she pronounces her version of that name, Weill, and Larison Campbell together on the Daily Beast's piece. This sounds about right in terms of what we should expect these days. They went to D.C. on January 6th. Now they're, under arrest, under investigation, subjects of FBI search warrants? No. Now they're running for office. Hooray. I can't wait. A slew of participants in the rally that preceded the riot. The rally that preceded the riot, see? And some who appear to have gone further than that are now campaigning for votes. How exciting and fortuitous, and it just portends such great things for democracy. On January 5th, Charles Herbster claims he was at Donald Trump's Washington, D.C. hotel with the president's 2 adult sons discussing ways to pressure Congress out of certifying Joe Biden's victory. On January 6th, he attended a pro-Trump rally that later led to an attack on the U.S. Capitol. On Monday, Herbster announced his candidacy for governor of Nebraska. Sure, why not? Herbster, who has agricultural businesses in multiple states, is running on the same staunch pro-Trump lines that brought him to D.C. on January 6th. He did not, he says, enter the Capitol that day, and he's not alone. From Nebraska to New Jersey, attendees of the now infamous rally that became a riot are campaigning for elected office. One, a long-shot Michigan candidate who previously organized anti-lockdown rallies in his home state, even appears to have entered the Capitol. But he'll probably die of coronavirus, so might not be anything to worry about. Attending the pre-riot rally was perfectly legal, if controversial. Even some elected officials took part there, and of course, some of them actually in Congress, and so were able to very easily lead people over to the Capitol to besiege it later on. Recently elected U.S. Representative Mary Miller, remember her? She's the one that spoke at the rally, giving an eyebrow-raising speech in which she stated that Hitler was right on one thing: whoever has the youth has the future. Her husband, a state representative in Illinois is what that mess was, owns a truck with a decal for the 3%er militia that was parked on Capitol grounds on the day of the riot. We mentioned that earlier, as the Daily Beast previously reported. Other politicians found themselves facing graver political trouble. Derek Evans, a new West Virginia state delegate, was arrested for allegedly storming the Capitol. And Virginia's state Senate voted to censure Amanda Chase, a state senator, now running for governor, who attended the pre-riot rally. Chase made a January 5th video with the head of the paramilitary group, the Oath Keepers, and later went on to call the Capitol attackers patriots. She does not appear to have entered the Capitol. But now, undeterred by hundreds of arrests of rioters since January 6th and the ex-president being reduced to hurling insults at the Academy Awards, a new slate of January 6th rally-goers is vying for its own place in government. Some, like Herbster, are campaigning on their pro-Trump credentials. Herbster has billed himself as close to the former president's orbit, even telling the Omaha World-Herald that he could not have participated in the Capitol attack because he left the rally early to go to Florida with the Trump family, who didn't actually go to Florida that day, but whatever. Former Trump senior advisor Kellyanne Conway participated in Herbster's campaign launch on Monday, and former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski is reportedly advising Herbster's campaign. His campaign did not return a request for comment because they probably weren't organized enough to do so as a result. Herbster is entering a crowded GOP primary, but in Virginia, restaurant owner Marie March won her Republican primary last week, making her all but a shoo-in to take office representing the state's 7th District in the House of Delegates. March attended the January 6th Stop the Steal rally, but says she left before the crowd broke into the Capitol. Nevertheless, her attendance has reopened wounds in the state, with one of her would-be colleagues in the House of Delegates pointing to a Facebook post she made after Derek Chauvin's murder of George Floyd last year. The coming civil war is complex, the post began. Not great. In a statement emailed through her campaign, March told the Daily Beast, "My husband, veteran father, and I attended President Trump's speech on January 6, 2021 at the Washington Monument." Wasn't really at the Washington Monument, was it? I thought it was at the White House Ellipse, but okay. "Before President Trump finished his speech, my family and I left, and around 2 p.m., we finished our meal outside of D.C. After that, we went home. Not only did I not enter the Capitol, but I was not at the Capitol. I apologize for nothing. I regret nothing," she said. The current candidates were not the only people to rally in Washington, and in some cases allegedly breached the Capitol on January 6th to harbor personal political aspirations. At least 15 other prominent participants in the rally or the riot had run failed campaigns for political office, according to a Daily Beast count. Some of them, like Proud Boy and failed Hawaii candidate Nick Oaks, or Ox, we still haven't figured that one out, and failed Texas candidate Jenny Cudd, have since been arrested for their alleged roles in the attack. Although Herbster and March claim to have left the rally early, other candidates appeared closer to the action. They are Jason Howland, who is running for Michigan's 31st House District in 2022. He was spotted in a throng pushing its way up the Capitol steps, as the New Yorker previously reported. Last year, Howland co-founded the American Patriot Council, a right-wing group that rose to national prominence after many of the militia members who allegedly plotted to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer were reportedly found to have attended some of the group's heavily armed rallies. As Howland and the mob reportedly pushed past officers under the bleachers, video appears to show his APC co-founder Ryan Kelly, who is running for governor of Michigan, in sunglasses and a black and white American flag cap, filming on his phone as rioters shouted, "We're in, we're in." In March, Kelly admitted to Michigan Live, which ID'd him in multiple videos, that he was in Washington that day to back Trump and referred to an event that day as energizing. He also told the Daily Beast on Wednesday that he did not participate in the unrest. "I never entered the Capitol. That is accurate," Kelly said via text message. "Likewise, no, I did not push past any officers, nor did I have any confrontation with officers, and it is not accurate to suggest otherwise." Howland, meanwhile, a co-organizer of last April's American Patriot Rally, in which heavily armed protesters stormed into the Michigan state capitol to protest lockdown, may have been more bold, according to videos and stills from that day. In one video, a man who bears a striking resemblance to Howland and wears the black TAT baseball cap that Howland occasionally wore in his own YouTube videos before January 6th, stands a few feet from the marble columns in the Capitol crypt. Howland did not respond to multiple attempts to reach him for his story, and like Kelly, he has not yet been charged with any crimes. Meanwhile, the APC currently maintains a watch list calling for the arrest of 17 public figures it says has violated the U.S. Constitution, from Governor Whitmer and the Michigan Secretary of State, who affirmed the 2020 election results, to Vice President Kamala Harris. Oh, I see. Who affirmed, I've read that wrong. It's Governor Whitmer and the Michigan Secretary of State, who affirmed the 2020 election results, to, that is to say, also including among those who they say have violated the Constitution, Vice President Kamala Harris. I think a comma would have been helpful there, folks. I thought they were saying they're going to arrest the Michigan Secretary of State for affirming the 2020 election results to Vice President Kamala Harris. Well, there you would have violated the Constitution because she wasn't yet president of the Senate. But okay, that's not what they're saying here. A few years ago, association with a group like APC, which hosted a rally outside the Michigan Capitol in June to help the public learn more about militias, thanks, may have placed a candidate on the fringes of the far right. But in Michigan, where state GOP chair Ron Wiseman recently joked about assassinating 2 congressmen from his own state party who voted to impeach President Trump, Howland and Kelly may not be that far off the mainstream. Normally, that would be something that's disqualifying, but in this race it seems to be something in the plus column. Roderica Applewhite, senior communications advisor for the Michigan Democratic Party, said of Kelly's actions on January 6th. Maybe the fringe candidates are the moderates in the Republican Party, Applewhite added. Still, she said she doesn't consider Kelly, who recently posted on his campaign's Facebook page that face masks, quote, condition children for servitude. I'd be careful if I were you about conditioning, talking about conditioning children for servitude. That's a red flag as far as I'm concerned. I know you're accusing others of doing it, but that's a separate red flag, quite honestly, for Republicans. But anyway, Applewhite says she doesn't consider Kelly really to be a real candidate or a threat to Whitmer, who was elected by a margin of nearly 10 percentage points in 2018. Howland could potentially face even longer odds in his race for Michigan's House District 31, which a Democrat has held for over 3 decades. But State Representative William Sowley, who currently holds the seat and is term limited, pointed out that Michigan will be redistricted before the 2022 election, and Macomb County, where he and Howland live, could be divided up much differently from what it is right now. What I've seen is the GOP in, again, how about the pronunciation? Did we once get a guide on this one? This county is very familiar in Michigan, but Macomb County has become far more extreme in its beliefs and platforms, which is concerning, Sally told the Daily Beast. In New Jersey, those fringes have found a home at the head of a local Republican Party, Edward Durfee. It's a very Durfee-sounding name, but that's his name, D-U-R-F-E-E. Edward Durfee is the chair of the state's Northvale Republican Club and a candidate for New Jersey's 37th Assembly District. He's also a decade-long member of the paramilitary group the Oath Keepers, WNYC reported, and has previously led a fundraiser for Oath Keepers recruitment, a Oath Keepers recruitment billboard in his state. Big-time project. The Oath Keepers are now under scrutiny after members were accused of plotting to break into the Capitol and arrest people inside. Some of the group's leaders are facing conspiracy charges for what prosecutors allege was a well-coordinated plan, with members communicating with leaders throughout the day. Durfee, who is not accused of crime, told WNYC he'd worked security. I would put that in air quotes, but it's not here. Security for the group at the Capitol and used ham radio to keep in contact with other members. Probably not on-site ham radio, but perhaps in the past. I got my radio on the right channel so I could talk to the other guys on the detail, he told the outlet, adding that he was hit by pepper spray during the day's event. So I guess he is saying he was doing it with a portable ham radio device and said ham radio. Oh my gosh. Anyway, Durfee, who did not return a voicemail seeking comment for his story, try ham radio, by the way, is running a long shot campaign. New Jersey's 37th Assembly District is solidly Democratic. The Northvale Republican Club told the Daily Beast that while it supports candidates running for the positions in the borough of Northvale, we have historically not endorsed candidates outside of those Republicans running for positions within the borough. That's a hell of a dodge. Still, the club hasn't flinched from Durfee's affiliations in the past. It has previously defended Durfee when opponents noted his Oath Keeper creds. Last year, when Durfee ran for Northvale City Council, his opponents targeted him with a mailer calling him and the Oath Keepers radical extremists. The Northvale Republican Club called the accusations innuendos. And that's the innuendo of the article as well. So, okay, very interesting, and that's something to keep an eye on. Once again, always keep an eye on those extremists who not only appear to be getting away with it, but are embedding themselves in the fabric of government somewhere. All right, Let's see. Other stories worth taking up, perhaps. This is an interesting one, although more of interest, I think, internally, in the household, inside Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, than elsewhere, because we've got some record of knowledge about this. But let me bring this up. I mean, this is an interesting point, and we have some time for some significant inquiry into this. We've brought up the fact that there's been some weird infiltration into the sort of the natural health and natural remedies sector of the internet by QAnon conspiracists. And there's a link in this piece to what I guess is the seminal work on that topic. But this actually, maybe Bill has seen this. This is from MainerNews.com, and a story on a national figure of some prominence in that sector, who I guess lives in Maine, titled Dr. No, the Deadly Grift of Women's Health Guru Christiane Northrup. Christiane Northrup, a alternative medicine, I suppose you could say, doctor, although she's veering further and further from really deserving either the reference or the title, but used to, many, many years ago, have a presence among the stable of alternative health doctors represented by the vitamin and supplement company that my wife works for. She's long since, I think, been severed any affiliation, but we remember her from days past, mostly because of her humorously named menopausal product. I don't know exactly what the whole thing was supposed to be, but a cream for treatment of, I don't know what aspect of the effects of menopause, that she was selling under the name of Creme de la Femme. Honest to God, I don't know who advised her that was a good idea, but that was a laugh line for years around here, as you might imagine. The Deadly Grift, though, of Women's Health Guru Christiane Northrup, by Nathan Bernard and Andy O'Brien. This from the November 2020 edition of Mainer News. It came to my attention, I think, as Twitter follow, an equality Twitter follow at that, Dr. Jennifer Gunther, right? Is that, do I have it correct? Who many of you likely have seen commenting on health issues as well as political issues on Twitter. Let me just make sure I have it all correct here and am attributing everything correctly. Yeah, she tweets under Dr. Jen Gunter. There's no H in it. It's not Gunther, but Gunter. And maybe you've seen her around. But anyway, she was tweeting about, in response, I guess somebody had brought up Christiane Northrup's name. She was on a panel, I think, of some kind, having moved fully into the space wherefrom she's been advocating against the administration of the coronavirus vaccines, not just from anti-vax perspective, but, you know, taking it above and beyond, making the claim, as I recall from the panel, what I saw mentioned, I haven't watched the panel, of course, but making the claim that, and I've seen this popping up in right-wing corners, and they've been referring to it obliquely, and I never have really been entirely certain what they're talking about, but apparently the claim is that the coronavirus vaccines are so dangerous that they're not just something that you should look out for because if you get injected with it, it will, you know, the various claims, change your DNA or make you sick or give you COVID or what have you, but rather that the COVID vaccine was giving those vaccinated the mysterious power to infect the unvaccinated. Of course, all the medical facts appear to claim the opposite, that and our understanding of how immunization works in general, is that it would make those vaccinated far less likely to infect anyone else. And in fact, it's starting to look like it's impossible for a vaccinated person to infect another, though it's not impossible for them to come down with symptoms of COVID-19. They are much less likely, I guess you could never say impossible, but much less likely to pass that infection on to others, possibly simply because their symptoms are considerably less severe. But anyway, she claims that the opposite is true and that people getting vaccinated are a danger to the rest of the world because they'll become more likely to infect others, and that just seems upside down and backwards. Well, anyway, the Mainer piece here has some photos and some screen grabs of her Facebook and Twitter posts, which are, important in illustrating exactly where she's coming from. On October 12th, though, the article begins, Dr. Christiane Northrup, the Dartmouth-educated physician and renowned women's health advocate, greeted her followers in another installment of her video series on Facebook, and this will ring alarm bells for you right away, The Great Awakening. It isn't until later on in the article that they actually acknowledge, the Great Awakening is one of the big taglines of the QAnon movement. But that's what she calls her video podcast series on Facebook. She calls her social media acolytes warriors of the radical light. There are well over 500,000 of them worldwide. From her estuarial manor in Yarmouth, Maine, Northrup gazed into her camera and spoke with the warmth of an old friend. Many viewers undoubtedly consider her one. Northrup, who turned 71 this previous week, this of course would be back in November of last year, has been one of America's most beloved holistic healers since her first bestseller, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom, was published in 1994. But fans expecting the uplifting spiritual health spiel Northrup used to deliver on Oprah, for instance, would be in for a surprise if they saw that day's video. Northrup began, innocently enough, chatting about how she'd spent her Sunday in mindful silence and joyous song, both silence and song, with a local meditation group. A member of the group had brought along his teenage son, who'd remarked that he doesn't like wearing a face mask in school, as mandated by the district, to deter the spread of COVID-19. I just suggested, as an act of civil disobedience, that he gather with like-minded students and not wear the mask, because it's not a law, Northrup told her viewers, and he said, that's out of my comfort zone. Northrup paused for effect. Right, she said. The teen didn't need to organize a mask boycott, and neither did her viewers. I understand just wearing a mask to run into the drugstore. I get it, because you have to decide which hill you're going to die on here, right? But, she'd told the teen, how do you think it was that the Nazis did what they did? They made it outside of everyone's comfort zone to talk about what was going on. Well, gee whiz. Made it outside of everyone's comfort zone versus executing millions of people and burying them in mass graves using bulldozers or incinerating them and dispersing their ashes so that there would be no record of their existence. Well, yeah, that's outside of my comfort zone. True. But it's not really in the same universe as putting someone outside of their comfort zone. But, never mind all of that, because something. You're all Nazis now for making someone uncomfortable about deciding not to wear a mask. You are a mass murderer. Anyway, the neighborhood, she says, and then the neighbor, under the Nazis, neighbor was turned against neighbor. So we had the snitches and the Karens, the Nazi Karens, and the snitch lines, and that's what we have right now, all over the globe. So another comparison to Nazi Germany. So apt. Okay, before this episode of The Great Awakening was over, at exactly 12 minutes, Northrup covered a lot of ground. She promoted a book called The Case Against Masks and sent viewers to the website Time to Swarm, which mobilizes what it calls an army, thousands strong, wielding silent weapons for digital warfare to amplify tweets advocating, quote, medical freedom. It's an interesting entree point to the world of Q craziness. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can find the story I referenced earlier about the business card exchange with Joe Biden post speech. But let me continue on for a little while longer. I don't know if we're going to go the whole rest of the show on Christiane Northrup, but it's just sort of interesting. And I guess leading up to the part where we're referred back to the story of the wider movement to recruit QAnon members through the alternative health sector, just so you have something to read on that front, and I guess not be surprised if you run into it elsewhere. Northrup took a brief side trip into the debate over the safety of 5G cellular technology during this podcast. According to a, quote, doctor who knows about this, that famous doctor, she said, if a man works on a laptop, on his lap for a week, that's where you put a laptop, yes, he'll no longer need to use a condom, which is always great advice, I think. Meaning, she says, that's how fast the sperm count goes down from the radiation of a laptop on your lap. Dubious claim. And of course, not a great thing to go around telling people that they don't have to use condoms if they put a laptop on their lap. That could lead to a lot of problems. She also dipped into the childhood vaccination debate. Northrup was an outspoken supporter of the failed effort last year to expand exemptions to Maine's student vaccination requirement. She quoted a woman who likened the public health program to someone asking me to set my kid on fire to keep your kid warm. I guess that's how they view childhood vaccination. Very helpful. I've been told I'm on some lists of conspirituality that you're supposed to avoid. That's an interesting term, and explains it a little bit after this. I don't know what it was from. The Huffington Post, Mother Jones. As far as I can tell, all these publications that we used to think were protecting our freedoms and were about health and yoga and breathing, they're captured publications. I don't know who's writing for them anymore. And it's interesting because it's a bit of projection as well. Lots of these health outlets that we used to think were, quote, protecting our freedoms and about health and yoga and breathing turn out now to be QAnon entry points. And lest you think that I'm making a leap here, the very next paragraph makes all the connection you want. But anyway, Northrup continued in this podcast, I want you personally to look up Q. There it is. Just go ahead and look it up. You decide, right? You make your own decision. Just do your own research on the internet. And then you decide whether Q is right for you. Don't ask your doctor. Just go ahead. Q, of course, refers to QAnon, the far-right conspiracy theory that argues, among many other bizarre ideas, that President Trump, remember this is from November of last year, is waging a secret war against a global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles led by prominent Democrats and Hollywood celebrities. The QAnon movement, whose adherents have turned violent on multiple occasions, they hadn't yet stormed the Capitol, after all, is considered a domestic terror threat by the FBI. Honest to heaven, Northrop said, everything that is about your freedom, your sovereignty, your health, appears these days to be a right-wing conspiracy. It's insane. If anyone had any ability to think critically left, they would see that. But they don't see that. And here Northrop broke into mirthful laughter. Then I sort of waver between, she explains, Pam Popper's, that's a naturopath YouTuber, Pam Popper. I waver between Pam Popper's "They're Too Stupid to Live," and at that point, Northrop drifts into another subject without mentioning what her other answer was, the one that ostensibly doesn't consider non-believers, quote, too stupid to live, whatever that might mean. It's possible she doesn't actually have one. Through a spokesperson, Northrop declined our interview request. Northrop built her career as an author and health advocate by challenging the patriarchal practices of traditional Western medicine, especially those in her chosen fields, obstetrics and gynecology, which is, I'm sure, how Jen Gunther became familiar with her. And it was, ripe for that kind of radical departure because there were real serious problems of, all of Western medicine to that point, chiefly having been dominated by men. And it made no particular sense that obstetrics and gynecology didn't have serious, strong representation among women doctors. But okay, this began to change at some point, and I guess she was on the leading edge of the public call for that change. But anyway, since the coronavirus pandemic swept through America last spring, she's been using her reputation as a trusted health professional to advocate behaviors proven to cause sickness and death. She's aligned herself with a loose network of crackpots and charlatans who profit off people's fears and is promoting their projects and products along with her own to her massive online audience using cult-like techniques. As COVID-19 cases surge again this fall in Maine and across the world, Northrop's nihilistic prescriptions pose a clear and present danger to public health. But just like the virus, it appears her viral disinformation campaign is unstoppable. Now, we mentioned conspirituality. Conspirituality is, as you might have guessed, the portmanteau of conspiracy and spirituality. It was coined by academics in 2011 to describe the phenomenon by which New Agers are unwittingly sucked into far-right paranoid fantasies, and its usage has skyrocketed this year due in large part to Northrop. It was Mother Jones that called Northrop out for her conspiritualism in a September 23rd article by Kira Butler titled "The Terrifying Story of How QAnon Infiltrated Moms Groups." I think it's that work to which we have referred frequently enough in the past, but we never actually read the story, and it might be worth taking a look at, but I don't think we can shoehorn both in. So perhaps we'll continue for the moment with the Christiane Northrop example all by itself. In recent months, Butler and other journalists have documented how QAnon is spreading among mostly white, relatively wealthy women via their interest in subjects like yoga, homeopathy, alternative medicine, and mystical philosophies. Interesting. And probably a group that you might have thought of, despite their white privilege and relative wealth, to be a relatively liberal-leaning group. It's if that was ever the case, it would be a very costly drift. But thankfully, it doesn't represent anything near a serious majority. The suburban white women still drifting further and further away from Trump, despite the QAnon infiltration. But what a strange thing. It's a weird phenomenon and deserves some attention. Matthew Remski is a host of the podcast Conspirituality. Together with co-hosts Derek Barris and Julian Walker, he's been documenting Northrop's slide into the sickening darkness of QAnon's worldview and how she's drawing her followers into the cult's vortex. Facebook's algorithms brought them all together, and QAnon's big tent conspiracism harmonized their grievances against the surveillance state, techno-globalism, corporate media, big pharma and big farming, medical violation, and the sexualization of children. Just throw that one in there, and that's, I guess, the Q addition to all of this. Remsky wrote last month in an essay published on Medium. Some followers started out concerned about vaccines, but got hooked by stories of vampiric child abuse. Others who were into crystals and channeling spirits came to believe that Trump was a light worker, a kind of spiritual therapist or warrior who channels goodness and positivity. Well, first of all, the idea that Trump channels goodness and positivity is ludicrous on its face. The idea that he would ever allow himself to be thought of as a spiritual therapist is likewise laughable on its face. But, I mean, how you come to the conclusion that a guy who's so negative and bitter, just poisonous, is channeling goodness and positivity, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Your crystals are broken. Northrup's October 12th video was one of many posts luring her fans into the conspiracy. The title of her video series, The Great Awakening, is also the term for a central tenet of the QAnon theory that posits a post-apocalyptic rapture-like rebirth of humankind. On July 7th, Northrup posted a link on Facebook to the video Out of the Shadows, which peddles QAnon ideas and is considered a sequel of sorts to one of the first viral videos used to recruit Q disciples. Did you see the first one? Northrup gushed in the post. Looks like more are coming. Good. Not everyone is along for the ride. Alice Ornella, a Bath resident who helped organize last year's pro-vaccine campaign in Maine, grew up watching Northrup on Oprah Winfrey's show with her mother. Ornella said Northrup always had an esoteric, non-evidence-based angle to her work, but is now alienating a lot of her longtime fans. In the 90s, my mom was quite into chakras, healing, essential oils, Ornella said. And essential oils is apparently a huge entry point among the online QAnon weirdo moms. Anyway, Ornella said she went through a lot of different belief systems, but now she's extremely angry about Northrup promoting QAnon, anti-vax, and other conspiracies. She wouldn't follow Northrup down the rabbit hole. That's good. QAnon is not the only far-right conspiracy Northrup is laundering. She played a key role last spring spreading Plandemic, a, quote, documentary that claims, oh boy, a cabal of elites, including Bill Gates and Dr. Anthony Fauci, are using the coronavirus to seize political power and make money. The video features Dr. Judy Mikovits, no idea if she pronounces that way or not, the discredited scientist who co-authored the book Northrup recommended last month, The Case Against Masks. Plandemic was posted online on May 4th and got a boost the following morning when a QAnon Facebook group with nearly 25,000 members linked to it. But as the New York Times reported, the video really took off that evening when Northrup promoted it to her Warriors of the Radical Light via Facebook. And here, Christiane Northrup has sent someone with a lawnmower to outside of Kagro in the Morning World headquarters just to try to distract us. We'll see how long that lasts. Northrup's status as a celebrity doctor made her endorsement of Plandemic powerful. The Times wrote, after Dr. Northrup shared the video, more than 1,000 people also shared it, many of them to groups that oppose mandatory vaccinations. Northrup did not respond to the Times' request for comment. The real conspiracy has nothing to do with whatever Q is, Northrup has said. It is the blatant and egregious censorship in the mainstream media of anything that goes against the mainstream narrative of something dangerous is out there that will kill us if we don't mask up, and we can't leave our homes until we've all been vaccinated. Northrup's opposition to big media is ironic, given that she's been boosted for decades by mainstream outlets eager to air her contrary views, beginning with one of the most powerful players in the business, Oprah Winfrey. Very interesting. In 2007, Northrup appeared on Winfrey's show to advise the host about her thyroid problem. In her 1999 bestseller, The Wisdom of Menopause, which Winfrey told her audience she reads, quote, just like it's the Bible, Northrup claimed, without medical evidence, that in many women, thyroid dysfunction develops because of an energy blockage in the throat region. An energy blockage, oh boy. The result of a lifetime of swallowing, quote-unquote, swallowing words one is aching to say. So you, by restraining yourself, because that's apparently what's expected of women by our culture, you create an energy blockage, which creates a thyroid dysfunction, which brings on menopause. Okay. On the show, she described Winfrey's ailment as a message from her soul. All right. In 2008, Northrup told an Oprah audience member that some deaths had resulted from the human papilloma virus. I don't remember the pronunciation, but HPV. Much easier to just go with the abbreviation there, but is that right? Papilloma virus? Okay. But the vaccine, she says, in 2008 had caused, quote, some deaths, which is scientifically proven. This vaccine is to protect women against the common sexually transmitted disease and defend against cervical cancer. Where I'd put my money is everybody getting on a dietary program that would enhance their immunity. And then they would be able to resist that sort of thing. So you can eat your way out of cervical cancer, she says, and STDs. This was Northrup's line, falsely implying that the STD can be thwarted by eating healthier foods. Northrup later admitted to Newsweek that she isn't certain that anyone has actually died from the HPV vaccine, but she said it anyway. The doctor's bunk advice and conspiracy peddling hasn't stopped Winfrey from giving her access to her millions of loyal fans. That's kind of scary, too. Northrup has appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show over a dozen times, as well as on the show's podcast, most recently in late August of last year. It was, written as this year, but in fact it is now last year. Northrup may consider HuffPost's a captured publication that lacks credibility, but the online news outlet published over 20 articles that she wrote between 2011 and 2014, and she's still identified on the site as a contributor, described as the world's leading authority in the field of women's health and wellness. Why not? She wrote it, after all. The description. So they put it up. As Northrup's views have become more extreme, there has been some pushback. Early this past spring, Maine Women magazine, a free, glossy monthly, published a cover story billed as an intimate chat with Northrup. The interview, published in MWM's April issue, made no mention of the doctor's anti-vax activism during the divisive statewide referendum campaign last year, and COVID-19 had yet to fully arrive stateside when the interview was conducted. But seeing Northrup on the cover while the pandemic raged in April was too much for Alan Spear and Mary Ellen Lindemann, the co-founders of Coffee by Design, an iconic Maine business known for its support of community causes. And worse, their full-page ad was on the back cover. CBD, cleverly chosen initials of Coffee by Design, is pulling its advertising from the magazine, and Spear and Lindemann went public with their concerns on Facebook. On April 10th, they wrote, "The decision to promote Dr. Northrup in a fluff piece that does not address her broadly known anti-vaccine stance, compounded by her now public statements that COVID-19 is a hoax, has put us in an extremely uncomfortable position. There has been no attempt by the publication to address the profile's poor timing or to publicly state that they do not support or condone Dr. Northrup's beliefs." MWM is owned by Reed Brower, the Maine media mogul who owns most of the daily and weekly news publications in the state, including Rockland's Free Press, which they note by way of disclosure formerly employed a co-author of this article, Andy O'Brien. Brower publicly defended his magazine and Northrup In an open letter to readers posted on Facebook on April 16th, Brower called MWM a human interest magazine that does not go into deep dives into political views. Probably true. Northrup's political views were not prominent on her website or on a casual Google search, Brower wrote. Never has Northrop said COVID-19 was a hoax. She believes government overreach is an issue. Echoing Northrop's equation of criticism with oppression, Brower characterized the backlash generated by the interview as an avalanche of hate, shaming, and bullying. In a clarification Northrop provided to Brower, she said, "It's incorrect to say she thinks COVID-19 is a hoax. I believe that the coronavirus is real," Northrop said, according to Brower, "but the way it is being spun in the media is inaccurate." 3 weeks later, Northrop pushed Plandemic into the mainstream, a video that falsely claims COVID-19 came from a laboratory and that wearing a face mask, quote, literally activates your own virus, unquote. That sounds pretty dumb. The dust-up between CBD and MWM briefly lit up Facebook, but was not covered by any local media. Not that Northrop needed to worry about bad press in her hometown paper. The combined readership of every newspaper in Maine is a fraction of the audience she commands on social media these days. She also has over 112,000 followers on Twitter, where her posts are often even more unhinged. For example, on October 22nd, Northrop retweeted a post claiming Canada is in the process of constructing concentration camps. Have you noticed that, Brian? Or any other of Ricky, have you noticed the concentration camps? I haven't heard you say anything yet. As the Conspirituality podcast hosts have observed, Northrop's COVID truther posts and winks at the QAnon crowd on Facebook far outperform her more pedestrian messages about health and wellness, generating exponentially more likes and shares. At this particular moment, what I find in my personal life is I take a stand on social media in a way that I have been empowered to do, like never before, Northrop said last month during a Zoom panel discussion titled U.S. Feminine Voices Speak Out. Is it the next Civil War? In the weeks after she posted the link to Plandemic, her Facebook audience grew by more than 100,000 followers. So I guess it's working. That's also over 100,000 more people who'll see posts promoting Northrop's website and email newsletter through which she sells her products. These include her books, audiobooks, videos, online courses, and her personal line of dietary supplements and beauty products, as well as stuff she's paid to endorse. From time to time, content Northrop posts on Facebook will be removed by the platform under the guidelines against false information, but the frequency of Northrop's posts indicates that Facebook doesn't suspend her from the site, even for a day, for spreading lies about COVID-19 or other subjects. In early October, Facebook's Dangerous Organizations Operations Squad, I didn't even realize they had one, tried to purge the site of QAnon content, including user accounts, groups, and feeds on its sister site, Instagram. Northrop's page was unaffected, and as earlier noted, a week after this purge, she was urging her Facebook followers to look into Q. Arguably, Northrop's page epitomizes Facebook's conundrum, Remsky wrote on Medium. It was the gateway for the Q-themed Plandemic that got the viral ball rolling towards an eventual 20 million views for the film. Facebook eventually banned the video and related content from its platform, but what can it do about Northrop's page, now waiting there like a lightning rod for the next bolt of disinformation? Remsky asked. It's much harder to define, let alone confront, the impacts of well-loved wellness influencers who game engagement with fear-mongering to enhance their brands. And that's probably as accurate an accusation of what's going on here as anything. It's also hard to measure the damage to public health this doctor's deadly advice has wrought. How many warriors of the radical light have been infected with the coronavirus and have then infected others because they've taken Northrop's quack advice that social distancing and masks are harmful? If or when a COVID-19 vaccine is developed and distributed, we're now in that era, the refusal of anti-vaxxers like Northrop and her followers to get the shot could significantly prolong the plague. Recent polls indicate that about half of Americans would refuse to get a COVID-19 vaccine were one available, and it's still the same. So I guess they weren't kidding. Or at least they weren't kidding about what they were going to tell pollsters. In the weeks leading up to Election Day, Northrup's rhetoric became increasingly militant. She's called on county sheriffs to refuse to enforce state lockdowns and mask mandates, invoking the language of white supremacist group Posse Comitatus and the far-right Sovereign Citizen movement. Northrop believes sheriffs, by virtue of being elected, are the highest law enforcement officers in the land, even above those who are elected, I guess. But anyway, with the power to invoke the 10th Amendment against any measures they deem unconstitutional. In a letter she wrote to the Cumberland County Sheriff, Kevin Joyce, which Northrop read online, she said, "This special status sheriffs have protect us from well-meaning governors who are issuing mandates for our safety and protection, and it protects us from wayward governors and other tyrants. I think it's fair to say in 2020, the tyranny of good intention is evident all over the country." During Is This the Next Civil War discussion, Northrop said, "I feel as though I've been called to midwife, as it were, this giant rebirth of planet Earth. And frankly, it is the same when someone is almost fully dilated. It's transition." Sure, it's exactly the same thing. "This is where all our mothers go. I'm leaving. I'm not doing this. I'm out of here," continued Northrop. What does it even mean? Who ended her OBGYN practice in 1999. And then you realize you're stuck. There's no out of here. There's no getting out of here. So you just have to stay with it. Everyone's supporting you and move through it. Wow. Birth is often, as you well know, not pretty, not comfortable. There's a lot of blood. And you just hang in there because you know that 99.9% of the time, this absolutely perfect human being is the end result. So, I don't know. I mean, nonsense and pablum at the end there. Stuff that you would expect to hear from a perfectly innocuous women's health expert, sure. But then just sort of cutting in with QAnon plugs in the middle of all that. I mean, I guess you all have probably figured out how how this has been happening by mention of the fact that there was extensive writing on the terrifying story of how QAnon infiltrated moms groups. The Kira Butler piece referenced in here. But I thought it might be interesting to hear an example of one particular and I guess fairly well-known women's health doctors sliding into that world, and so completely at that, and telling people, just go look up Q and figure it out for yourself. Just sort of exactly what you don't want to hear. All right, let me see if I can't find. I'll find for you Jen Gunther's tweet about the panel that she was on, which must have just, don't have to go too far back, I don't think. I think it was a tweet from last night, but I can point you to it just so you can see kind of the context of where she is currently, Christiane Northrup, and what she's going on about these days. Here it is. She's actually responding to someone else's tweet here. 9 News Nancy, I guess somebody who was formerly with Channel 9 News. Anyway, Channel 9 where? I don't know. But I think actually tweeting favorably about this panel. But let's see. We'll see what Jen Gunther has to say about this. But the quote on this panel here, "It's not a vaccine," says one of these weirdo so-called experts on it. "It's not a vaccine. It is an injection." I don't know what the hell that's supposed to mean, but that's the sort of fabulous medical advice they're offering about this. There's Christiane Northrup down in the bottom there. Jen Gunther noting, "Dr. Northrup is a 2-bit grifter who is full on QAnon, and I wouldn't trust her to give me medical advice for my pet rock. You have quite the gallery of idiots there," and you can see for yourself who joins her in this panel. It's just a weird and bizarre angle on all of this, and maybe I thought perhaps some of you might have run into Christiane Northrup in your Oprah Winfrey watching. Entirely possible. Anyway, that wraps things up for today. We'll be returning tomorrow, Friday, for the third of this week's solo programs. I gotta tell you, this is like winding to do this, and I enjoy sharing these stories. It's a good opportunity, though, to clear out some of the weirder and more esoteric stories that have been sitting around, which I think are important to our fuller understanding of the amazingly bizarre picture we still face, from January 6th conspiracists to QAnon activists to the weird mom groups that are getting sucked into this thing. So I hope you find it useful and entertaining. And hey, if you need harder detail and harder news, there's always, well, we'll return to it too, of course. But Justice Putnam brings you more next on the West Coast Cookbook and
NetworksRadio.com.
Stay tuned.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, there'll be more about the Giuliani case, of course, and the Texas GOP official suing Biden over aid to black farmers has got a history of, you'll never believe it, hateful comments. And the first woman of color to lead the U.S. Securities Watchdog Enforcement Division resigned after only 5 days on the job. Find out why.